If I asked you what the most painful experience in your life so far has been, would you know what the answer was? I could probably tell you what my most painful moment was. I was a wee kid, I fell backwards, I hit my head off the back of a table, and for whatever reason, instead of taking me to A&E, where accident and emergency, that is, at hospital, where I could have got some anaesthetics, my mum decided to just stitch my head up with a needle with no anaesthetic. I think that, and maybe like getting my finger trapped in the hinge of a deck chair, those two moments are probably the most painful of my life. I think the stitch, the having a needle, a metal point go under my skin and back out again several times was a very, very intense form of pain, the most intense that I've experienced. Very sharp, very extreme. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because this book in today's episode is a book of extremes. Pain is one of the extremes, but there's, violence writ large, pleasure, sexual pleasure is in there, but also like extremes in how you live your life. Should you go for a quiet life? Should you strike a middle path? Or should you try and really exert yourself? Is one of the best things you can do to completely assert yourself, to overcome yourself, overcome society, overcome the ties and restrictions other people place on you. Is that the way to go? And whether it is or whether it isn't, does it make for an interesting book? I think it does. That's probably why I was happy to do an episode on this one. It's Moyan's Sandalwood Death, and my guest is going to be none other than friend of the pod, Stefan Rusinov, who's in this episode will be coming on to the show for a second time. That's very exciting. But before I charge ahead with that interview, I'm going to take us into the news section of this show, the TrChFic news, translated Chinese fiction news. So the first news item, it's sort of a follow-up to the last episode that we did, which was on Han Song's Hospital. The translator of that book, Michael Berry, has translated a blog that Han Song wrote. It's sort of it's called A Record of My Battle with the Virus. I've read this one. So Han Song is sort of looking back on his experiences in hospitals, one or two health problems of his own, and has, I believe, more or less survived at least one case of COVID-19. So it's a sort of a view from on the ground of what's going on in China right now with COVID. It's not, it's a realistic, I suppose, picture. It's not bombastically good or bad. He just delivers you the facts as he's experienced them. Well, he doesn't deliver you the facts. He delivers you his own experiences, the facts of his own experiences. And then at the end, he gets a little literary and weird with it, citing his own hospital trilogy right at the end. So that's available to read. There's a link to that in the show notes. It's called A Record of My Battle with the Virus by Han Song. Next news item, there's a call for submissions. It's about the author, Hong Kong author Xi, who passed away very recently. So the publisher behind this call for submissions, I believe, is the Cha Journal. They're looking for writing about or inspired by the works of Xi. So if Xi is a writer that you know about or interested in, then this is probably one for you. Go check it out. Okay, the third news item, it's a new book in translation that's come out. It is some wuxia translated by Deathblade. It's another novel by Gulong. He's put this one out for free. The novel in question is Blood Parrot. I believe it's I don't know. I don't really know much about this one. I believe it's very Gulongish, so violent, edgy, maybe a little bit funny. And like I said, this one is up for free by a very hardworking and conscientious online translator, Deathblade, aka Jeremy Bai. So again, there's a link to that in the show notes. It's called Blood Parrot. Okay, last news item. This one is something I thought it would be nice to throw in a link to. The South China Morning Post has written a review, kind of overview/review of The Wandering Earth 2, which is the new prequel to a new film prequel to The Wandering Earth. The film is set during the sort of preparation for making The Wandering Earth that the first story is set on. So readers or fans of the novella that The Wandering Earth film was based on, Dale Qian's novella, might get a bit more out of this one. From what the reviews say, this is better than the first one. I would like to believe the reviews. I've not seen the film yet. I was a bit disappointed by the first one. Perhaps my expectations were too high, but my expectations are being raised up again by all these positive reviews. So yeah, I'll suppose I'll share my own thoughts once I watch this film. But in the meantime, if you've seen it or if you haven't, I've linked to that review on the South China Morning Post, but I'm sure there's other equally interesting reviews out there. So that's all for the TrChFic news. Now it's time for the interview, so you can listen to me and Stefan discuss this absolutely insane novel, Sandalwood Death. Please enjoy. On the show, we have Stefan Rusinov back again for a second time. The last time you were here, Stefan, it was to talk about Sanshua. So what's been up with you since then?
Hello, Angus. Thanks for inviting me again. And first of all, I apologize for my Eastern European accent with which I'm going to torture your listeners. And I know I was the substitute player for this one. You wanted to invite Howard Goldblatt, the translator of the book that we're going to talk about. You wanted to invite Howard Goldblatt, and it would have been really nice to talk with him, for you to talk to him about this book. But now we will get the chance to bitch about his translation and about him. So maybe that's nice. I don't remember when we recorded the Sanshua episode. Was it like 2020 or something like that?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot has happened. Yet, like some standard but major life events happened. First of all, I settled in a new city, which is allegedly one of the oldest cities in Europe. It's called Plovdiv. And it's older than Bulgaria, so it used to be a Roman city, and then back before it used to be a Thracian city. And by the way, you're more than welcome to come visit. My wife said that she's going to cook you some Bulgarian treats if you come, so I wouldn't miss that.
Nice.
Speaking of my wife, I got married last year, it has been fun so far. It's been more than a year. Then I became a father 4 months ago, which has also been fun. Yeah. And I have a newborn in the next room. Maybe my wife is going to come at some point to change his diapers or something like that. Maybe we'll be able to hear his voice. And I finished the Liutasin trilogy, the Remembrance of Words Past trilogy. So I translated that into Bulgarian. The third volume came out last year. And that's about it, I think.
I probably already said congratulations on your marriage and your baby, but again, and from the listeners, congrats. That's awesome. And well done as well for finishing Three Body.
Yeah, that's really happy
as well.
Really happy. That was hard. It was a lot of work, but it was really interesting and really gratifying at the end. Yeah.
All right. And what's next up on your translator chopping block?
Well, I might have to put translation aside because this month, I took my PhD exam. So I am going to do a PhD. And my major this time will be, we have this discipline here called Western European Literature. It's a very typical thing for Eastern European countries, I think, to have this discipline. And my knowledge of this discipline is very, very, very limited, but I decided to take up this challenge. So I took the exam, and now I'm going to compare Chinese avant-garde writers from the 80s with the European avant-gardist movement, and also some modernist writers, I guess. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's excellent. That sounds like, well, the only story I can think of that we've covered on the show that fits that exactly would be Goethe's Flock of Brown Birds.
Yeah. I haven't really delved into Goethe's work so much. I will have to. I'm thinking right now more of Sanshua, of course. Yuhua's short stories from the 80s, which are great. I love them, and I would like to translate them at some point. And actually, there's the Chinese Nobel laureate Gao Xinjian. I think he should be considered an avant-gardist writer, but I haven't seen him in any anthologies and collections and essays or articles about avant-gardism, but it might be worth it to check him out as well.
Very nice. Speaking of checking things out, and speaking of the chopping block that I mentioned a minute ago, I thought we could get to the book. It's a Moyan, so we've done him once on the show before, but not one of his novels, just a novella, or maybe even a long short story. And that was Radish, Toming the Honglo Bo, I believe is the Chinese title. That was also an episode so long ago. This book that we're doing today is Sandalwood Death. So that's Tan Xiang Xing, I believe, is the original name. And like you said, you translated this one, and the English language translator was none other than Mr. Howard Goldblatt. I had a crack at getting him on. I got so close. I had an email exchange with him, then maybe if I had written my emails in a slightly different way, he'd be here. There'd be 4 of us in the room. There'd be me, you, the recording robot, and Mr. Goldblatt.
No, I wouldn't have come. It would have been nice to just, because he participates in so little like public events. It would have been nice if he agreed to do the show, for him to be by himself, I guess. But yeah, what do you do?
Indeed, yeah.
We tried to get Lutasin to come to visit the Bulgarian Science Fest, but he declined. So I know how you feel.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
That sucks. You just need to work on developing Bulgarian sci-fi, sort of like Chinese government style. Get the government involved.
You think that will work?
It might get his attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have Howard Goldblatt, but we do have the translator from Chinese to Bulgarian of the book.
Yeah.
So listeners may know Moyan. If you don't, essentially, the big thing to know is maybe the big thing to know is he's China's only winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. If you don't include Gao Xinjian, who won it but was a French citizen at the time.
Right.
Moyan writes. He made it big in the 80s, but he's been putting out novels and what have you since. He writes in a somewhat magical realist, but also somewhat realist style. I think it maybe depends. Based on my understanding, it can depend a bit on the story. I believe as well, some of his stuff will be set in historical periods. Some will be more recent, from what I understand. Radish was set all the way back in the 50s. Right. This one's set even further back. He wrote this, I believe, in the 90s, but it's set around the dawn of the 20th century, if I have my timing right, around the time of the Boxer Rebellion.
So it was published in 2001 in Chinese. Almost exactly 100 years from after the Boxer Rebellion. Yeah. I'm
just going to check when this translation came out.
That was 2008 or something like that.
2013, apparently.
Oh, after the Nobel Prize. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a Chinese Literature Today series edition. So Chinese Literature Today, for you might know this, Stefan, but it's for listeners. It's a journal, an academic journal all about Chinese literature. It's tied to the University of Oklahoma, which is where Howard Goldblatt is tied to. So I believe quite a lot of these CLT series books are Howard Goldblatt translations.
I think so.
And yeah, I think they're quite cool because they may be from an academic press, but they have quite nice looking covers. This one's a pretty nice product. Sure. And it's a really great novel. It's not just a boring piece of high-minded blockish text that no one's ever going to get through. It's a very good read, I think.
I'm curious to hear what you think about it and what do you like about it, but I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah, for sure. I have a trick these days for summarizing books. I have been using this in my Patreon episodes, but I think it works pretty well in the main ones as well.
You were reading the blurb on the back?
Exactly. Rather than trying to summarize the plot, I'll just read the blurb, and then
go.
If it misses anything, or if we can give the listeners more useful info, we can fill it in.
Also, this little disclaimer, I translated this Well, I translated in 2014 and 2015, I think, and it came out in 2016 in Bulgaria. And I haven't gotten back to it since then. So I cannot really say that I remember everything, but it's still, the impression it gave me is still kind of strong. So we'll see.
Actually, before I plunge into the blurb, I should ask you more about your connection with the translation. How did that come about? Is it an interesting story?
To me, it is. So I graduated from my master's in Wuhan in 2012, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I came back to Bulgaria, and I was translating stuff, and I tried to reach some publishing houses to publish this contemporary avant-garde writer. And no one really gave a shit about him, so no one really wanted to publish it. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I was thinking about doing farming as well, like growing tomatoes and stuff like that. And October 2012, like 2 months after I came back from China, Moyan wins the Nobel Prize. And no one knows a fuck about Moyan in Bulgaria. Like, no one's ever heard about him. He's never been translated. No one's really ever mentioned him. I don't even remember if we've studied or even mentioned him in our contemporary Chinese literature class in the university. So people are curious and are starting to look for someone who knows something about him. So naturally, they reach to my Chinese literature, contemporary Chinese literature teacher. And he's really cool, but he's kind of lazy and he doesn't really want to do public speaking and stuff like that. So he tells them, well, there's this guy that just came back from China and his major is contemporary Chinese literature. Ask him. So people start calling me, and I started going to TV studios and talk about Moyan, although I've just read a couple of his stories.
Right.
And yeah, I guess people started to know me and that I do Chinese literature. And several years after that, the publishing house wants to do 2 of his novels, Sandalwood Dead and Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out. They did Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out first, and they gave, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but they gave Sandalwood Dead to someone else who did a really shitty job. But the thing is that they translated the whole thing, like the whole book, and it's a really big book. And they asked me to kind of read their translation and evaluate it. And it really sucked. Like, it couldn't be read in Bulgarian at all. Right. And I was really, really young back then, but they asked me to do it. And I wasn't sure because I was really scared, because Moyan's like vocabulary and style were way beyond me back then. For example, his vocabulary in Chinese is way richer than mine in Bulgarian. So was really scared, but I accepted it and was really stressed while I was doing it. But I did it. I don't know if I did a good job, but it was a really, really good adventure. And yeah, it helped me. It helped me grow as a translator, and I keep it. How do I say it in English? I keep it as a warm memory in my heart, like in my professional trajectory. And it got nominated for a National Translation Award, National Book Award. So I guess that was a kind of a recognition too. If awards mean anything, of course.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, but right. You have a question about translation after that, so we're going to talk about the translation. It's very interesting.
We can get to that. Absolutely. Yeah. Right, so time for the blurb. Here we go. This powerful novel by Moyan, one of contemporary China's most famous and prolific writers, is both a stirring love story and an unsparing critique of political corruption during the final years of the Qing dynasty, China's last imperial epoch. Sandalwood Death is set during the Boxer Rebellion of 1898 to 1991, an anti-imperialist struggle waged by North China's farmers and craftsmen in opposition to Western influence. Against a broad historical canvas, the novel centers on the interplay between its female protagonist, Sun Mei Niang, and the 3 paternal figures in her life. One of these men is her biological father, Sun Bing, an opera virtuoso and the leader of the Boxer Rebellion. As the bitter events surrounding the revolt unfold, we watch Sunbing march toward his cruel fate, the gruesome Sandalwood punishment, whose purpose, as in crucifixions, is to keep the condemned individual alive in mind-numbing pain as long as possible. Filled with sensual imagery and lacerating expressions for which Moyan is so celebrated, Sandalwood Death brilliantly exhibits a range of artistic styles, from stylized arias and poetry to the antiquated idiom of late imperial China to contemporary prose. Its starkly beautiful language is here masterfully rendered into English by renowned translator Howard Goldblatt. I think the final paragraph is doing it. It's telling you what makes the thing special. The rest is, I guess, telling the bit before that about the Sandalwood Death is the plot, and then before that it's
The
the
political
setting.
background, the historical background. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
so. So I don't know. It's what I can remember, like really briefly, is it's a story about. So obviously we're in Tsingtao, and the Germans are there and are trying to build a railroad, which is really main to the story, and they're causing some trouble, and a local opera singer leads a revolt against them, and it's a really epic revolt, very tragic and very funny as well, to me at least. And he ends up in prison, and his daughter wants to free him, and his daughter is married to this guy who is how do you call it, mentally handicapped, and his father, the guy's father, is like the empire's best executioner, and he comes there to execute Sunbing, the leader of the revolt. And there is also the magistrate, how do you call it? Yeah, the local what's the word?
Official.
Help me. Yeah, local official who's in charge of everything, and he's kind of he's the lover of Sunbin's daughter, Sun Meinyang, but he also has to serve the government and the Germans, and I think his character is really funny because he's really between the two opposites. Like he's the one who's most like torn between the different interests that are in this story, and it's very funny to see him struggle with that, to me.
Yeah, to me he was maybe the most interesting character because he seems to be a lot more educated and smart than the other characters, but it seems like that just gives him more refined ways to mess everything up and to be a bad person.
Right.
He's able to be a bad person but be smart about it, unlike, say, the executioner. Zhao Jia.
But again, there aren't really any. I don't know if you agree with this, but there aren't really any bad characters or good characters in this story. I mean, everything has something good and bad in them. Like there isn't a single person who would say, "Yeah, this guy is the hero of the story" or something like that.
Not out of these main characters. Maybe some of the secondary characters you could write off as being nasty.
Yeah, like who?
Is he called von Kettler, the main German authority in the area? Maybe Empress Cixi. She doesn't come across. That's an interesting thing. You have like these real historical figures, like von Kettler was a real guy. Cixi, if you know your history, obviously she's real. And we even have a guy who would go on to do things after the fall of the Qing. The governor of Shandong province at the time that's terrible, I'm blanking on his name. Oh dear. He was the guy that installed himself as emperor.
Yuan Shikai. Right.
Shikai. Yeah, Yuan Shikai comes across as a bit of an asshole in this one as well.
That's true. But they're still very, very complex. Not very, and it's very interesting how Moyan makes fun of them too. He puts like lines in their mouths that sound really funny. He exaggerates their characters, I think. And at least to me that was I sense that Moyan really wanted to make fun of that, but not in a disrespectful kind of way, I guess.
I felt like the bit where it says in this blurb where it says sensual imagery, lacerating expressions, stylized arias, masterfully rendered, starkly beautiful. I felt like those weren't just cheap words, that whatever he was trying to do with the book is hard to put into words, but it's supposed to be the words on the page are supposed to create a strong sensory effect in your mind. It's supposed to, whether it's because it's darkly funny, because the characters are larger than life, because the events are either, very violent or very sensual or very sudden. It's not, although the way the characters are drawn is what's the word? Intricate and complex. It's not necessarily a subtle form of complexity. It's a more sort of maybe not turn everything up to 11, but turn everything up to like 8 or 9, if you know what I mean. And turn up lots of dials. So don't just turn up the politics dial, turn up the humor dial, turn up the music dial, turn up the
violence dial,
the magical realism, surreal stuff, violence. And also bringing in historical figures as well. It makes the stakes, gives it a level of reality, knowing that, a few chapters in, that's terrible, I forgot his name again. The governor,
Yuan Shikai
is gonna show up. They're not just talking about him, like he literally shows up, and then even the Dowager Empress shows up. I thought I'd mention for listeners who maybe don't know their Moyan so well, it's not by chance that he's picked Germans as the evil Europeans here. It's the German, I think the only Europeans we meet in the book, only European colonizers we meet are the Germans, and that's because Moyan is from this place called Gaomi County in Shandong province, which is on the bit of Shandong where Qingdao is, this thing called the Jiaodong Peninsula, the sticky out bit of Shandong. And at this time in history, that was a German colony. This was like the one part of the Qing dynasty China that Germany had stolen for itself, essentially. They governed it as an area called Jiaozhou. So all the action is happening in an area where, like, there's sort of a dual government. The Chinese authorities are basically managing things on behalf of the German colonizers.
Right.
And everyone who's involved in the imperial bureaucracy is essentially implicated in the colonialism and the oppression. Well, there are things being constructed, but it's not really to benefit the local people. Like industry is being built up. There's a railroad being built up, but it's all the local people, the local Chinese people are getting none of the benefits, and they're being upset. And if they complain, they get murdered, basically. And that's the sort of fire that's under all the characters that drives the plot forward.
And I think he's balancing the description of this historical background very well with digging into the interpersonal relationships and describing the characters' feelings, and also getting into some details and describing it in a very literary way. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily historical novel, or he's trying to just to use a story to tell us what was back then. He is really digging into his characters and their relationships, and he's really trying to make great literature of that, because it's not a straightforward narrative. It's a very complex, it's very mixed, and it's very typical of the writers that started writing in the 80s to play with time and to not tell the story in a chronological way, but to kind of mix it up and to create this chaotic effect, I guess, because we have to kind of it's a little difficult for us to put it all together, to say which comes first, which comes after what. And that is a thing that Moyen really cares about. I think he wants the novels to be difficult to read. He believes that the reader should put an effort to understand the novel, and that's the whole point of the novel. Novels shouldn't be easy; they should be hard to read.
I definitely, for the first few chapters, I kind of struggled to get my head around what was going on. Once I was past a certain, I think even at that time, the plot was still moving forward. So it wasn't that he was writing a dull story. It was just, like the sort of scattered style of narrative was, I had to like get into whatever rhythm he was going for.
Yeah.
Once I was on board, I started going through the book much more quickly.
Well, it's a very, very interesting structure. So we get the first part where we have 4 different narrators, which are the 4 of the 5 main characters. Then we get the middle part, which is called in a third, which is told in a third-person narrative. And then we get the last part where we have the 5 main characters narrate the story from the first person again, which is a very interesting endeavor to me. It's a very admirable to be able to write a novel from 6 different perspectives. So it's kind of a literary cubism, if you can call it that way. We get the same story told from different perspectives, and we get to know the story from the different characters' feelings toward it. So apparently every character has different feelings and different receptions of the story. So I think that is a very interesting narrative method to explore. And I think that Moyen does it very good here, although maybe it's really more interesting when you get to a story like that where there are discrepancies between the different narratives. For example, one person would tell a story and another person will tell the same story, but there will be different facts, like facts that don't fit together. Like, for example, Rashomon, the movie by Akira Kurosawa, or if you will, Citizen Kane or something like that. But we don't get that in this novel, I think. But the story is pretty much fit together. Just the emotions are different, and the way they are told are different, because it's one thing when the magistrate, the official, tells the story with his elegant and sophisticated way of speaking, and another thing when the Zhao Xiaojia, which is the retarded son of the executioner, tells the story.
Yeah, I think you're right to say there's a kind of a cubism going on with the different narrators, because, well, number one, we have third person and first person both in here, but also it's not like, say, one of the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire books where there are different, I guess they're not first person, they're different, you get different third person, like over the shoulder views of different characters, but they're all in the same literary style, a very simple style made to just help you read the book. Whereas here, like, the way, I think it helps that it's first person, but like the way people, the different characters see the world through their own filter, and the things they focus on show up in the chapters. Like, and I also think you're right to say he doesn't want to make it easy for you, because from what I remember, the first couple of narrators are Menyang, who seems to have a complete high-speed rail speed mind.
She's nuts. She's nuts. She's very angry. She's very angry. She's angry. Like, she's spitting fire.
And she doesn't, at least in this first chapter, from what I remember, she doesn't really stay on one topic for more than a few paragraphs. She's completely scatterbrained.
Yeah.
And she's always addressing people she's pissed off with in her head. And it's a good intro to the other characters, because she's pissed off with all the father figures and men in her life, who are all the other main characters. She's the only main female character. No wonder she's so pissed off.
Yeah, but I wasn't right about saying that the same story is told by different characters, because actually they're not telling the same story. They're telling different parts of the same story. So there's not a repetition like Rashomon.
Right.
Different persons telling exactly the same events. No, different persons tell different events from the same plot. It's more precise to say here.
Yeah. I think the magistrate, what do you call Qian Ding?
Yeah.
His chapters, I think, for me, were the easiest to read because he's the guy that's focused on the sort of political trouble that's being like he's the one who's has an eye on what's actually going on, and is in charge of managing the disruption and whatnot. Everyone else is just sort of dealing with their own issues. So Sun Meinyang is having her affair. I guess Sun Bing is driving the plot forward as well because he's in the Boxer Rebellion. But then Xiao Jia, the mentally challenged husband, he's just hallucinating animals half the time. He's in his own world, totally.
Right. Yeah, like literally, like we get when we see the story from his perspective, everyone in the novel becomes like panthers and monkeys and stuff like that. So we get yeah, and it's really described like the panther goes there and jumps and some stuff like that. So that, I guess, that's the magical realism part.
Yeah, and then when we were with Zhao Jia, the executioner, that feels like everything he's focused on felt to me like Mo Yan going into the more bizarre literary sort of experimental zones where he tries to get he gives us a view of a guy who is obsessed with his craft and his art form, and it's been his life, but that art form is torturing people in the service of like a feudal regime. And that's no small literary feat. I saw one review just before this call that said this is a great book. The one problem is that it doesn't condemn the executioner, and it goes into horrific detail about what he does to people.
Well, would you get a 10-page description of punishment? Yeah, of a torture? Yeah.
And I think on one hand, yeah, of course, that's disturbing, but it's not the same book if it's not there. It's a much more plain book without the thing it's named after, the Sandalwood death.
Well, that is what Mo Yan has said like a numerous times, including in his Nobel lecture, I think, that he likes to explore this muddy territory between good and evil, between good and bad, where things are not really set, where you don't really know what to think about things, because really we get some kind of how do you call it, admiration for torture, but that's because we see it described by the torturer himself, by the executioner. And there are several lines which I think are really funny, and I think that I sense that Mo Yan is really exaggerating this for a comic effect. For example, when Zhao Jia tries to get his son Zhao Xiaojia to join him and to help him with tortures. So Zhao Xiaojia, his son, is what is his profession in English? Like a slaughter.
A butcher.
A butcher, yeah. He's a butcher. And he's saying that butchery and torturing are all the same. They're all slaughtering, but slaughtering animals is like very inferior. But slaughtering persons, slaughtering people is very, I don't know, superior. And so we also get that everything in China is really backwards and not progressive, but our tortures are very progressive and very excellent. All kinds of that are really, I think, very ironic comments, and he doesn't really say anything against the torture, but there are there are a lot of ironic remarks like that. And another thing is that and I think this is valid for all of Moyan's works that I've read, is that I cannot really sense Moyan himself in these stories. Like after I've read several of his novels and a lot of his short stories, I don't really have an image of the author. I don't have an impression about him. So he conceals his voice very well, I think. So Moyan means don't speak, and I think in some way that's what he does in his writing. He doesn't speak, and he lets his characters speak. And I think his writing is very where's the word? Ego-less. Where's the word of a person who
egoless? I can't think of a good word for egoless, but the meaning is clear. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of a good word for that. But yeah, the author is not trying to sort of selfless. It's interesting because I did get the feeling that he was trying to make a fully rounded novel, and that like I've only read one other thing by him, Radish, but it felt like quite a different narrator. But at the same time, it seems like, although I'm reading this in translation, seems like really he was really swinging for the fences, trying to do something interesting with language. Like there's parts where I think Howard Goldblatt, he says in his intro, he had an awful time because there's parts of or perhaps an engaging challenge. I don't know if it was awful, but there's parts of the book that are written to be like in a Chinese opera style. So Qian means opera, and they have a kind of opera in this part of Shandong called cat opera. So that would be Mao for cat, Qiang for opera, Mao Qiang. And Moyan has tried to write some parts of the book, including like intros to chapters in that style. Yeah. And then Howard Goldblatt's done that by writing in a sort of affected way, using brackets, using sort of lyrical sentences. So yeah, it seems like it's quite an ambitious go at writing something very special.
It's very interesting that actually this opera, which is called Mao Qiang, the original character is not the character for cat. It's another one, and I don't know what it means, but I guess it's just so Chinese operas from different regions have their specific characters, and I don't know where they originate from. And for some reason, Moyan changed it to cat opera, and there's a lot of mewing, like in the novel. Like when there's a song, there are a lot of there's a lot of cat references in the novel, which was really funny as well. I mean, there's this really serious story and a tragic story, and someone comes to sing and he's mewing, and like there's meow, meow, meow all the time. This is another signal for me that just Moyan is having fun and messing around with the storytelling.
I'm trying to find a good bit that has the meow meows in it. It feels extra funny in the age of the internet because a lot of the meows have the little curly punctuation mark after it that I know a lot of people, at least on WeChat, you'd see people, usually women, using that to be cute, the little squiggle. Yeah. So you'll have like a vivid description of a horrible execution, and then the next paragraph will just be meow meow, and then a little squiggle in it. Let me try and find a good one. I think this would do it. So this is one of the arias that opens chapter 17. It says it's a childish aria.
Right. So this must be Zhao Xiaojia's part, I guess.
Yeah. He seems to. I think he gets infected by this meowing first, but then a load of opera singers show up to sort of protest Sun Bing's execution, and they start meowing, and it becomes like it felt to me reading anyway, a really weird mix of tragedy, horror, and quite childish comedy, because all these people are meowing, and I couldn't tell if that was lost in translation or what. So here we go. Sandalwood steaks tested on a pig, Dia training me to match his masterful skills, all to impale Sun Bing from the bottom up. Pound in the steak, pound in the steak, pound in the steak. Meow, meow, meow. A raucous crowd comes our way down the street. A cannon fires. Bad news brings a change to my eyes. And then skipping forward a few lines, it is Yuan Shikai, that bastard defeat, a high official who is no match for my dear. Meow, 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 meow. And then it's the end of the aria.
Right. Well, I guess we'll have to say that I think in the chapter that is narrated by Sunbin, which is one of the last chapters, Mo Yan gives a description about how Mao Tiang came to be what it is, and there's a description of someone, maybe Sunbin, I don't remember, wearing a cat suit, which of course is made by real cat skin, and that's how it started according to the legend in the novel. So that's why I guess this is a very, it is funny, but it plays a very solemn role in the people's revolt. I think like this is in some way the novel is about the battle between the train and the opera, because the train is what is the foreign, the other, and the opera is the local, our own stuff here. And for them, putting on cat suits and mewing and meowing at the oppressors is a very powerful way to revolt, I think. It's very funny as well, but it's very, very powerful as well. I can appreciate Mo Yan mixing these how do you call it, two feelings together.
Well, in the spirit of this book, if things get any worse here in the UK, I'm putting on my cat suit and I'm riding the train down to London.
Okay.
I'm gonna meow at our Prime Minister.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, do it. Go for it.
Yeah. If all else fails,
I'll
use that approach. Gosh, what was I? Oh, yes. So speaking of the railway and the traditional local culture, I was just saying to you before we started recording that there's a sort of a afterword, a note from the author Mo Yan, as well as an intro from the translator Howard Goldblatt at the start. And a really quite interesting thing is that Mo Yan says when he started writing the book, he was sort of focused on the local memories of the trains. So he had grandfathers and grandmothers and who were around when the area was a German colony and were there when this railway was being built. So and he was saying there's sort of a collective memory in the community of the sounds of trains and so on. And he used that auditory environment to try and inspire his writing, and really was really quite focused on the trains. But then when he reviewed his draft, he felt it was too close to magical realism. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because that the question of whether the work was magical realist or not came up when we're talking about Radish, and it seems like it's a sort of a classic question you could have looking at a lot of writing from this time, from like Mo Yan, maybe Yu Hua, maybe there's another guy, I've done him on the show, Raise the Red Lantern,
Su Tong,
all that sort of generation of authors. And so Mo Yan was like, no, this is too magical realist, and his decision was, I need to make this more Chinese. So he must have been thinking of magical realism as a foreign genre. So his way of doing that was bringing in the Maoqiang opera, which he'd also sort of grown up hearing about. And I think he said he collaborated with a storyteller who would tell stories through song or through opera, and he did some kind of collaboration. It's not just us making assumptions when if we say something like he tried to write a very Chinese novel with lots of Chineseness. He said himself that was one of his aims in the redraft of the book. So the trains were, in his style, tied up with the magical realism, which he seems to be positioning as the foreign genre, and the opera is his way of bringing in the Chineseness. So it's even there in his process as well as in the narrative.
Yeah, but speaking of that, maybe we shouldn't, if your listeners haven't read the book, maybe we shouldn't give the impression that Mo Yan is, with this novel, putting up some nationalistic ideas or something like that. In his Nobel speech, he is saying that he's really trying to, like all excellent writers, to speak, to tell the most local story that he can, but with it to reach, and this is very particular for, I think, the writers in the 80s. They all wanted to reach what they call the common soul of humankind, something like that. So I think this can be read as a general human story, this one, and it's
You could read it as a comedy about in-laws.
Yeah, absolutely. Moyan says that with this novel, it kind of marks a turning point in his writing. Before that, he says that he was kind of not sure what he was doing, and he was kind of mumbling to himself and trying to tell stories. But after that, he gets the feeling that he's situated on a square and a lot of people are listening to him, and he has to perform before them. So he kind of starts to see himself as this performer, and I think this is very obvious in this novel, that like you said, it's a very sensory experience, and it's not only a story. It works on many levels.
For sure. I thought there's another bit I could read. It's from this crazy first chapter, Sun Meinyang's Lute Talk. So before she just goes into like taking you through her grievances, she gives you a very strong narrative intro, which, like, I think the reason I think of this now is that it really feels like an author who's not just sort of testing his literary skills, but also thinking about his readers and audience. It has a really strong sort of grabbing you by the throat style, the sort of intro to a novel that you're told to write in writing workshops, something that immediately grabs your attention. So this is it. That morning, my Gongdia, Zhao Jia, could never, even in his wildest dreams, have imagined that in 7 days he would die at my hands, his death more momentous than that of a loyal old dog. And never could I have imagined that I, a mere woman, would take knife in hand and with it kill my own husband's father. Even harder to believe was that this old man, who had seemingly fallen from the sky half a year earlier, was an executioner, someone who could kill without blinking. In his red tasseled skull cap and long robe, topped by a short jacket with buttons down the front, he paced the courtyard, counting the beads on his Buddhist rosary like a retired Yuan Wailang, or better yet, I think, a Lao Tai Ye, with a house full of sons and grandsons. But he was neither a Lao Tai Ye nor a Yuan Wailang. He was the preeminent executioner in the Board of Punishments, a magician with a knife, a peerless decapitator, a man capable of inflicting the cruelest punishments, including some of his own design, a true creative genius. During his 4 decades in the Board of Punishments, he had, to hear him say it, lopped off more heads than the yearly output of Gaomi County watermelons. And a lot of the book is right there. There's a bit of humor at the end there with the watermelons. There's a lacerating spoken style of writing, and there's an intro to the character, and it's pretty clearly in a sort of Chinese context, because you've got both his description of his clothes, but then also Howard Goldblatt has made a choice to keep quite a lot of words in Chinese in his translation as well.
Yeah. Does he have a dictionary at the end of the book explaining those words, or because that's really there was a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I think he says in his intro that he thinks more Chinese should be introduced into English through loanwords, and he makes a complaint that a lot of the ones we currently have are not close to the original words because they've been misheard by idiot colonizers, basically.
Right. Sure, but do you get what Yuan Wailang means in this?
Me? No.
Yeah,
no, I have to look it
sure.
up.
Well, how is that introducing new words then?
Yes. Yeah, I think he's sort of maybe hubristically counting on the fact that people are going to copy him and that the words are going to enter the mainstream. But yeah, I've got a list here. It gives you it gives you the pinyin, it gives you the Chinese characters, and then it gives you definition.
Oh, so there is one.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, at the end.
That's
it's
okay.
At the end. You'd think it would be at the start, but I guess if it's a glossary, it would go at the end.
Glossary,
so
right.
He's got Dan, as in the opera roll, Dia, which he's put an H on the end of, so it doesn't just say die.
Right.
Dia, Gan Dia, Gan Arzi, Gan Niang, Gong Dia, Jin, Kang, Lao Tai Ye, Lao Ye, Niang, Jinjia, Shao Ye, Sheng, Shifu, Yamen, Yayi, Yuan Wai Lang, Zhang Yuan.
I think I've rendered all of them into Bulgarian.
I think you could make an argument for plenty of these. I think there's some where he overdid it.
No, it's all right. It's a translator's decision, I guess. So,
yeah,
his call.
True. So we're a little lost. Stefan does know he has something very smart he can say. It might not pertain very much to what we were talking about a minute ago, but you know what? Doesn't matter. We're avant-garde.
No, yeah, we're okay. What you said about Zhao Jia, about him trying to excel at something so terrible as executing people, kind of made me think that actually all of our characters want to be want to do what they're doing in a kind of a legendary way. For example, if you remember Sun Meiyan, her work is making soup from duck meat, and she wants to make like the best fucking soup from duck meat that could ever exist. And who else? Like Qian, the magistrate, he wants to be an epic magistrate. He wants to excel at being a magistrate. So Sun Bing, of course, wants to be, and he is the most epic opera singer that could ever exist. And there is this inclination of living a legendary life. Like it doesn't really matter if you die, if you've lived in an epic way. And this is, of course, a very problematic life stance, but I think it's kind of inspiring as well. For example, I want to be an epic translator as well. Like, I don't want to be the best translator. I want to be an epic translator. Like, I want to do a translation and I want people to say, oh man, this is, how did he do that? And of course, I'll probably never do something like that, but it's a very nice thought. So I think this is kind of, I felt this in other novels by Moyen that I've read as well. There's this inclination in his characters of trying to lead legendary lives, and yeah, no matter what they do, they want to be the best in it.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's not just the executioner. Everyone has their own sort of profession or art form. And I think that I can link that to what you said about how Moyen is not trying to write he's bringing in Chinese traditional and cultural elements, but it's not for the service of like a national identity, or maybe it's some kind of local identity, but it's not for patriotism, because no one is doing the things they do to like build the nation or fly the flag. Even Sun Bing the rebel, I would say maybe he's doing something like that, but it's mostly he's just out for revenge because his family have been slaughtered by the Germans. So he's maybe out for justice.
Yeah, and the Germans have fucked up the feng shui in the territory, in their village. So with the fucking train.
Right. So he's maybe the one guy that has a higher collective mission in mind, but everyone else, and him to some extent, I would say they're just in it for the love of what they do, being excellent at something, and maybe finding some kind of a transcendence from your own conditions through that.
Yeah.
Maybe some admiration is the goal as well. I guess Menyang wants people to like her food. I guess Qian, he's a very vain guy. He probably wants people to shower him with compliments for what he does. But I feel like ultimately everyone just wants to be good at something for its own sake. And like you said, sort of be epic, have something kind of bombastic or remarkable about what they do as well. I think that's very true.
And also what I was thinking is that, I don't know how, what your impression is, but since we get very, very little Chinese literature here in Bulgarian, and whenever a Chinese novel comes out, and I always get asked the question, so how does this represent China? how is this representative of China, and what can we learn about Chinese history and Chinese culture from it. But what I'm always thinking is that good literature is almost always subversive in a kind of way towards the culture from which it comes. So when Mo Yan is including this opera style from his hometown in his novel, and I think I've read interviews with him where he says that this is almost a lost art, this opera style. So it's a commentary on how the Chinese culture is not valuing its local arts enough, and he's kind of trying to preserve it, but it's not a national pride. It's some kind of a more, it's a smaller kind of pride with his home village, which of course it's part of China, but it has its own characteristics.
For sure, yeah. I thought I could move us past our sort of middle segment of the conversation to ask you, before I get to the miscellaneous section, about language. We've talked a fair bit about this before, but I want to ask a two-pronged question, since you're good enough at Chinese to read a book in Chinese, and I'm not, and furthermore, you translated this one. So what does Mo Yan's Chinese look like? Like, is he using clever techniques? And when he's writing things like the arias, what does that look like? How hard is that to read? And then also, how did you try and bring it into Bulgarian, and how do your efforts match up or differ with what Howard Goldblatt tried to do?
His literary style is really, really abundant, and it is hard to read even for Chinese people. Like, a lot of Chinese readers are having a hard time reading his books. Why? Because he's using a lot of strange, obscure phrases that are not very used in like everyday language, and he is including phrases from like ancient Chinese and dialects as well. So what I did when I translated this book was constantly, of course, looking up words and phrases, not only in a dictionary, but looking them used in sentences around the internet, asking people, asking Mo Yan as well. I sent him around 150 questions for this novel, and he was kind enough to answer all of them, because there were things that I couldn't understand. And what I probably shouldn't admit, but I will, is that probably a year after I translated the book, I opened the original again at the random page, and I read a random sentence, and I didn't understand it because I just couldn't understand the phrases. But he does use a lot of idioms, and very masterful things here is that the 5 different characters really speak in a different manner. And I don't know if you can tell this by reading Howard Goldblatt's translation. For example, like Sun Mei is really, like you said,
fiery.
Her language is very, vernacular.
Verbal? Yeah.
Yeah. She used, and also vulgar. Like, she's probably the most vulgar narrator in amongst the 5. And Tianding, he's really sophisticated, and he uses a very elegant prose. And for example, when I was translating Sun Mei-Nyang's narrative, it was very easy to me because I curse a lot in my own everyday life, and her language was really close to me. Also, when I was translating the mentally challenged guy, that was really easy to me as well. But when I came to Tianding, that was a real problem. And what I started to do was I bought the Bulgarian phrasal dictionary, like a really thick volume of phrases, of idioms in Bulgarian. I just started reading the dictionary, so I could dig up phrases that I could use to make him sound like really educated in Bulgarian. And what I discovered by reading the phrasal dictionary is that we don't really have this in Bulgarian, this high style literary language. Most of our phrases, idioms, are really vulgar. vulgar actually. So I could use them for some menyan, for example, but Qian I had a really big trouble by translating. And I don't know, what do you think? Can you tell by reading Howard Goldblatt's translation that they speak really, really differently, these separate characters?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've thought of a good word for Meinyang. She's quite unfiltered.
Right.
I think a good way to think about the character's point of view is filters. Meinyang she has a lot of output, she's got a lot to say, and she doesn't really control or filter it very much. Then you have Jianding, who has all his layers of cultural filter that affects how he takes things in and how he analyzes things, maybe draws on analogies and frameworks of, so like, yeah, his speech or his train of thought is more sort of formed and sculpted. And then with Xiaojia, I certainly remember that it's much more scattered and reality's a lot more fluid because the guy's hallucinating. And he has, I guess also he has a child, the writing style I remember being a bit sort of childish.
It is, definitely is.
It's Qing era China. No one diagnoses what mental handicap the guy has. But you can tell that he's not just a bit slow. He's maybe had a delayed mental development because he's kind of, not only is he hallucinating, he's got a kind of a childish way of speaking or thinking.
Yeah.
The ones that I don't remember so clearly are Sun Bing's, so the rebel, and Zhao Jia, the executioner, maybe because their personalities are a bit more close to the baseline. They're certainly interesting characters, but I don't remember the prose style being quite so stylized. But maybe I've just forgotten.
Yeah, I guess I don't. Sun Bing is not really very distinguishable language-wise, I think. And for Zhao Jia, I guess the atmosphere, the vibe there is that he's really arrogant, so that influences the way he speaks and the way he thinks and the way he narrates. But yeah, that is one characteristic. And another thing that I did was, there is actually statistics of Bulgarian writers who use most words in their writings. So I read that, and I got a few novels by the Bulgarian writer who uses most words in their writing. And I read a couple of those just to take some vocabulary. But the problem is that there were a lot of Turkish loan words in these novels. So I didn't want to use too many of those, because after all, we are in China in between the 19th and the 20th century. And I didn't want the Bulgarian reader to feel like he's in Bulgaria or they're in the Bulgarian 19th century or something like that.
Yeah, that's not going to help matters.
Yeah, but yeah, these are two funny things that I did. I also read some historical books in order to get a feel of the historical background and stuff. Yeah, Tianding was the hardest.
Right. So my next one, this is in the miscellaneous set of questions. It's the word of the day. Does any sort of Chinese special word spring to mind that captures the essence of this book for you?
I think we should go for meow, like the onomatopoeia, like not the word for cat, but the word for mew in Chinese. We should go for that one.
Self-explanatory, really.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next question, this one's a bit harder. I was panicking because I hadn't picked one before I sat down. If you were gonna set this one to a film and you're looking for a track for the soundtrack, maybe the intro music, something to set the scene, what song would you pick? And I'll throw in as a side note here, I think I had an auto translation of this book's Chinese language Wikipedia page, which said Mo Yan is on the record as having said he regrets that Sandalwood Death's never been adapted into a movie. So let's imagine we can make his wish come true. What song do we pick?
I think they started doing a TV series based on it, but
right.
I'm not sure if that ever came out. Well, obviously we should include some Mao, and I'm gonna send you a link for a video on YouTube where there's a recording of a opera performance in this particular style. But what I started thinking is that since this is mainly a novel about opera, nevertheless Chinese opera, I started thinking whether European opera has some work about revolt, and I remember the title by a Tchaikovsky, a title of a Tchaikovsky opera, which is called the Voyevoda, and Voyevoda, I don't know, in Bulgarian means a leader of a revolt, actually. But I know that the Tchaikovsky opera has nothing to do with revolt, but maybe we can choose that. It's very interesting when you listen to classical music and try to imagine a story when you listen. I think everything fits really, and it's a really interesting. It gives you a new perspective on the story when you listen to a piece of music, and so it has slow parts and it has gentle parts, but it also has the action, and I think it kind of fits the story.
Nice. Can you send me the name of that in the chat just so I can?
I will, and I was trying to find whether there's some Chinese punk band that is incorporating Chinese opera instruments, but I couldn't find any. Right. But that would be interesting.
I know there's Chinese metal bands that throw in traditional instruments.
Yeah, I think that would fit as well.
Yeah. The one I've got, so this was literally just, I was scrolling through my music collection in panic, trying to find something that fit the mood.
Right.
And lucky me, I got a lot of hard rock and heavy metal on here, and I feel like the book is chaotic and violent enough to excuse that. So I'm picking one called Bridge Burner by Mutoid Man. Time to wash your hands of us. It's very fast. It's kind of punk infused. I don't know what you call it. Quite crunchy metal. It's not very gothic or anything. It's very energetic, and it's kind of it's got a celebratory mood. Basically, just saying, "I'm glad I burned my bridges. I'm glad to see the back of you." And it didn't really occur to me until now, but quite a lot of people burn their bridges through the course of the novel. Qian Ding becomes more and more disillusioned with the role he's playing in the government and may or may not burn some bridges. Sun Meinyang's ready to burn some bridges from the word go. Sun Bing's whole plot trajectory is about rebelling. It's about as bridge burny as you can get. So yeah, a lot of old ties get immolated or severed. So that's what I've gone for.
That's cool, and that kind of makes me think about how everyone really in this story is trying to play a role, and like we said, they're trying to excel at this role, and that's where the tragedy and the comedy comes from. Some of the tragedy and some of the comedy, because most of them are failing, or there are moments certainly in the novel where they're failing, and you can see that this is something like an exaggerated role that they've put on themselves, but it's not really who they are, or it's not really it's not the whole of them. And there are cracks in the novel where you see how they don't fit in this role, and they're really funny again, and also very tragic.
Okay, our next question, or the next question I have for you, is the bonus question for Patreon. So, listeners, when Stefan answers this question, you are going to hear blah, 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 blah. But if you want to hear his answer, then you got to subscribe to this show's Patreon. It will be going up, or it will be joining the queue of episodes going up. So it may not be up immediately, but it will head up there eventually. So the bonus question is this. Why? I will give a bit of context for this first. So Sun Bing, he joins the Boxer Rebels. He becomes a local leader. We've established that. What we haven't mentioned is that he kind of takes on the guise of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, and his right-hand man takes on the guise of Bajie, Piggy, and other rebels dress up in other ways, like from totally different figures. Or is it, no, he's UFA, the general, someone else is Sun Wukong.
Right.
So the point being, we have two people from Journey to the West, but then we have real historical figures. I guess it's a sort of a fantastical, almost magical, realist version of a Boxer Rebellion, where the rebels have basically just dressed up as people they think are cool. So my question for you, Stefan, is if you're joining the Boxer Rebels, who are you going to be? And that's it for the bonus Patreon question, really. Fairly speedy one this time.
Yeah.
Just one or two things left now in the further reading questions, the final section. So the first of these final questions I have for you, Stefan, is if our listeners want more like Sandalwood Death, where would you send them? And the obvious one would be more Moyan, right?
Yeah, definitely recommend Laugh and Death Are Wearing Me Out. It's a very wild story about a guy being executed in 1949 or 1950 when the communists come, and then being reincarnated as an animal, and then dying again and being reincarnated as another animal. So there was a dog, there was a bull, there was a donkey, and another one that I can't remember right now. And again, it's told from the perspective of the animals. So it's a story that that takes place again in rural China, and it tells a 50-year history of China from the 1950 to the 2000s, and it's very wild again. So definitely recommend that. I cannot really think of anything. So Moyan mentions Marcus and Faulkner as his influences, though he says that he only read some of their works and didn't dare to read more because he was afraid that they would influence him too much and he would forget what his real self is about and what he really wants to write. And in his Nobel lecture, he also mentions Pu Sunling, the author of Strange Tales from Liaojia, with fox spirits and stuff like that. And Moyan says that when he was a child, he believed that everything had a soul, like the tree had souls and the animals had souls, and he was always expecting the animals around him to turn into humans. And that definitely comes from Pu Sunling. And he also mentions Shen Sun-wan, the writer from the first half of the 20th century, who wrote this beautiful little novel, Border Town, which is available in English, and I hope someday to translate into Bulgarian as well. I couldn't really compare those to Moyan, but I guess they're his influences, so maybe they're worth checking out. They're definitely worth checking out, but I don't know how they compare to Moyan.
Excellent. I'll recommend, for anyone who's interested in reading more books or novels set around the Boxer Rebellion, there is another one which is more of a love story than this one. We covered it on the show. It was Feng Jitai's A Looking Glass World. That's published in English translation by Sinuous Books. That's a more, I guess it's a more, it's not as German, the Europeans aren't German-centric. We have one main European character, she's French, but like it's at the point where the, what's it called? The 8th Army Alliance has showed up. So the Boxers are taking on all different flavors of foreigners rather than just Germans, and the action happens around Tianjin rather than Shandong. But I kind of mentioned that just to say that I think all the literary impressive feats and very vivid characters aside, I think this book's a very interesting little zoomed in snapshot of sort of the Boxer uprising, because it's so particular to Shandong that it's not even combat against all the colonial forces that are in China at that time. It's really just against the German colony, and I'll bet you it's the only thing that exists in English translation in fiction that is about Shandong people versus the German soldiers run by von Kettler. And then you get with that an interesting depiction of how the German colonists were working alongside / sort of protecting themselves with the local authorities. And then triply interesting, who is there but the guy whose name I keep forgetting?
Yeah, Yuan Shikai.
Yuan Shikai. Yeah, Yuan Shikai. So if you go into this novel already knowing who Yuan Shikai is, but not realizing sort of who he was before he had his big moment, like me, that was really interesting too.
Cool.
So yeah, cool. I think the local angle we talked about, and we've already kind of said the historical angle is not, you shouldn't be treating this as a history book, but as a depiction of a very specific slice of history. I think it's great. Maybe that's not necessarily why Mo-Yan wrote the book, but it might be a nice side effect of it.
Yeah, when I was translating it, I was checking all the historical details that he uses, because there are a lot of them, and I was wondering, has he researched all this in order to write the novel? But I kind of find a few, like one or two mistakes that he had made. For example, he writes that, on the hats of the imperial officials, there were these gems. And depending on what gem you wear, this means that you're on a different position. Like the higher the position, the more expensive the gem. But what I found out is that at the end of the Qing Empire, the emperor was too poor and they couldn't afford gems, so they kind of replaced them with glass or something like that. And when I discovered this mistake, it suddenly struck me that he probably hasn't researched anything. It's just knowledge that he has in his head, and that's very impressive that he could put all this knowledge into this novel. That's very admirable to me. And I was also thinking that I read an essay by him. So when he won the Nobel Prize, a publishing house in China published all of his works. And for some reason, for every novel, there was an introductory essay by Mo-Yan, but it was the same essay for all the books. And the essay is called something like that, something like in defense or defending the dignity of the novel. And there he says that the novel should be, like we said, long. It should be dense, and it should be hard. So by dense, he means that it should include lots of things, like lots of different ideas, lots of different characters, lots of different thoughts. And this kind of reminded me of this Mikhail Bakhtin's idea of the polyphonic novel, which, according to Bakhtin, the novel, the virtue of the novel, like what distinguishes it from other genres, is that it can afford to be polyphonic. It can include different voices, different types of narrating in one text, in one single text. And I think Mo-Yan executes this pretty well. But what Bakhtin is talking about when he does this argument in his research is Dostoevsky's novels. So maybe we can just mention Dostoevsky's name here as well.
And you've cited an anarchist philosopher, so the ghost of Bajin is cheering.
Okay, yeah.
We've made him happy. Excellent. And you've given me a great thing to cite in the show notes as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Final.
Sure. The good ideas come at the end of the episode.
Yeah. It's disturbing how long these final sections can drag out.
Sorry, listeners.
It's all right. Well, for the ones who don't want the episodes to end, they'll be well served. Our Tanshua episode we did last time was one of the longest ones I've done.
Right. What's up with that?
I think it
How
was because
come
I
we
was
don't?
in lockdown.
Maybe
I had,
I speak too slow because words in English come really slow to me.
I think it was partly I was in lockdown, so I
Right.
didn't care about time.
Yeah.
Time was the thing I had to fill up, and we were talking about several short stories rather
Right. And
than like
I
summarizing the
remember that I
book.
really wanted to pee at one point because we were talking so long and I really could barely hold it in my pants.
And several of my best episodes. That's why they've stayed in my memory.
Yeah.
The one with Ken Leo had a toilet break. I think we may have gone at the
Okay.
same
Yeah, that
time.
was a long one. That was a great one though.
Yeah, yeah. I'm privileged he stuck around so long for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, final question for you. What are you reading just now?
Well, a lot of things, but one book that I'd like to mention is a book by Umberto Eco, the
Oh yeah.
Italian novelist and philosopher. So he's written a book about translation, and I saw that it's translated into English, and it's called, let me see, Experiences in Translation. But the original Italian title is something way more interesting. So it's something like
That's ironic.
saying almost the same. So it's a book about translation and it's called Saying Almost the Same. And I like this idea that translations are always almost the same as the original, but never the same as the original. And it's a really good book. He discusses a lot of the discussions he's had with the translators of his own works in different languages. He also plays around with machine translation. And mind you, this is like the start of the millennium. So yeah, machine translation not so good, but he kind of thinks about this as well. Yeah. And he describes some very important aspects of translation, and I find it very useful and very entertaining to read.
Excellent.
What about you? What are you reading?
Reading a strangely similar sort of book, actually. It's a non-fiction, and it's called Kingdom of Characters by a Taiwanese-American academic, Jing Tsu. And it's characters is kind of a pun because it's partly about the Chinese script and partly about various figures from modern Chinese history who tried to adapt the script for the modern world. So I'm maybe like 4 out of 7 chapters or something like that through the book. So we've had people in the late Qing, early ROC trying to figure out ways to first make a national standard Mandarin, and then trying to find a way to adapt Chinese so that it will work via Morse code for sending telegrams. People trying to make Chinese work for typewriters. And the chapter I just finished reading today was about people, including Lin Yutang, tried to work out a library categorization system for Chinese writing, because obviously it doesn't have the benefit of an alphabet. And I think we're about to go into the next one will be revolutionary China, and it's going to be pinyin and maybe simplified Chinese.
Sounds very interesting.
It's very readable, and I think a big draw will be at the end of the book where you get into how Chinese was digitized, how it was they worked out how to get it into computer systems.
I'm very envious of all the resources about China that you have in English. Like, we have nothing in Bulgarian.
Yeah, that's your job.
Yeah. Yep.
On that note, good luck to you. I hope you can maybe your mission should be to become a teacher so you can make more Stefans to bring more stuff into Bulgarian.
Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to. I am actually teaching translation at the university, but no one's interested in like spending their nerves on translating a book and getting almost nothing in financial return. So yeah, I cannot really make a good case about translating literature from Chinese.
You could read them this novel and be like, look, just be like these characters. Just
dude, don't care about anything. Just lead an epic life and die young. And that's it, like Sun Bing.
Yeah,
Sun Bing, who actually, so the original title actually means Sandalwood Punishment, not Sandalwood Dead. So the Sandalwood Punishment is like this really, again, sophisticated punishment. Like they prepare this long wooden.
But yeah, we didn't even get into that.
Stake, right? And they stake the person, but the person doesn't die. The person stays alive like for 7 days, and with the stake through his body. Yeah.
And I'll save it for people who read the book, but the point where it enters and the point where it exits, it's a horrible mental image. It's horrible to think.
Yeah, and it's described in a very vivid detail.
Mm-hmm. I know we shouldn't be sticking all this stuff on at the end, but there's a very interesting note in Howard Goldblatt's intro where he says, so Tanxiang is sandalwood, that's in my title, but Xing is not, that's punishment. I chose death.
Right.
Why did I do that? Because this is a very musical novel and I wanted to preserve the music, partly because the title should be musical, but two, because there's a line in the book where someone in, I guess the Chinese says, Tan, Xiang, Xing.
Yes.
And you can't really do that if your title is Sandalwood, punishment. Doesn't work. He needed a one-syllable word with a lot of impact. So death is what he chose.
Yeah, okay. But, you could, I guess, you can do it sound melodical and with 4 syllables as well. I don't know. Sandalwood, punishment.
I think I like about Goldblatt is he has a bit of artistic ambition, and I think he managed to create. But they don't. Some have it more than others, especially since he's working before a lot of the really good translators in English are out there today. And I think Sandalwood Death is it doesn't sound like a translated, well, maybe it does, I don't know, but it's a very literary, striking title. So I think I would give kudos to him.
It's a good one, and his translation is very precise. That's what I can say about it. I mean, I didn't read it. I didn't read the whole thing, but for example, when I stumbled upon something interesting as a translation problem in the original, I would solve it myself, and then I go look how Howard Goldblatt has solved it. And sometimes I would discover that I've misunderstood the original, and when I look at Howard Goldblatt's translation, I would say, oh yeah, that's what the original actually means. So it's very precise. And about the style of the translation, I wouldn't want to evaluate it because I'm not a native English speaker. So
you know his Chinese name, right? Ge Hao Wen.
Right.
So Ge Hao Wen, if you're listening, we salute you. We wish you'd come on the show, but we understand.
Yes. Maybe about Life and Death and Wearing Me Out. That would be cool to discuss with him.
It's not too late. He can still reply to my email. It's still dangling. You can just say he forgot about it. But well, Stefan, it's been an excellent conversation. Thank you for taking the time to come back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And on behalf of the people of Bulgaria, thank you for translating this work. I think I'm allowed to represent your nation, right?
Maybe. I don't know. Thank you for having me. It's I'm a great fan of the show, so it's a real pleasure to come here and embarrass myself in front of your listeners.
I do it every episode.
Right.
It's a highly recommended form of embarrassment.
Sure.
All right, we've reached the end of the show, as I'm sure you are no doubt aware. I'm going to rocket through the end notes today. So first important end note, Howard Goldblatt, if you're listening, come back to me. It's not too late. I'm sure he's not, though. In any case, here's what you need to know. If you want to support the show and get access to over 100 bonus episodes, go to patreon.com/TrChFic, TrChFic. You can also support the show via Buy Me a Coffee. You can find that on the show website. All links in the show notes below, as are links to the show's social media. You can follow me on Twitter at @AngusLikesWords. And the show has its own Instagram at TrChFic, TrChFic. And of course, there is Discord if you want to talk to other people who enjoy the show. That's your lot, really. Of course, the best thing you can do to benefit this show is listen to the episodes and spread the words. Tell your friends, tell your teacher, and tell the guy that you are going to torture via the Sandalwood death, assuming that is you work in that sort of profession. If not, then whatever the equivalent sort of client would be. Please don't hurt anyone on that note. 再见